Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Majority Leader. Good morning, Chairwoman Gillett. Thank you for coming and your testimony here today. It depends on what you read and what report you see, but unfortunately, as you well know, Connecticut has either the second or third highest electric rates in the country. When you started, it was around that ballpark. It continues to remain there today, and since your tenure over the past 5+ years, you've been the head of PURA. Electric rates have continued to skyrocket. So the basic question to that is, one, I would assume you agree with that statement. Is that correct?
Agree with the factual statement that electricity rates have increased.
Yes.
I will agree with that. I will not agree with the premise that that is within PURA's control. I'd be happy to address the components of that.
Well, so you're saying that PURA has no bearing on the electric rates of the state of Connecticut?
No, sir. I apologize if that was what I just conveyed. What I was hoping that we could get into was understanding the 4 components of the bill and who regulates them and who has control over them. It's something that I cover in the PURA 101 extensively, and I was hoping to get into that and to explain which portions PURA has control over.
What I'm primarily concerned about is the role that PURA plays in controlling rates, because my understanding is that utilities do come before you to ask for increases in rates, and you have approved them in the past. Is that correct?
So supply, which is the first bucket, it has been deregulated by this legislature in the late 1990s. So when we talk about the utilities coming before PURA to seek approval, what they're seeking approval of is the ability to put that rate on the bill, check off that they have followed the procurement strategies, but that price is tied to the wholesale market and competitive procurements. So when I hear folks talk about whether PURA has approved or disapproved, the consequence of denying that is that folks would not, when you turn the light switch on, you would not receive power because this is a deregulated market. It is factually accurate to say that PURA has allowed the utilities to procure electricity in the supply bucket that is tied to the regional wholesale market. The transmission rates, which is the second bucket, are regulated by FERC. Not PURA. Those have gone up, and similarly to supply, the utilities must receive our blessing to put that price onto the bill. However, again, it's not within PURA's control to raise or lower that rate. The third bucket of public benefits is the portion that is tied to, I think, 56 or 57 different components of legislation that has been passed by this body over the past 2 to 3 decades. When that comes before PURA, we have the authority to essentially audit those charges to make sure that the utility is passing through no more and no less than was authorized by law. That is the component that folks have been feeling on their bills for the last number of months. That is a 10-month recovery, and I did not support that. I was in the minority of that decision. So the agency approved that public benefits increase. The final component of distribution is the one that PURA has the most direct control over. Those were the rate cases that I referenced to some degree in my opening remarks. We have had rate cases during my tenure from Aquarion, Connecticut Water, UI and CNG and SCG, and then currently Yankee is pending before us. In the CNG, SCG, and Aquarion cases under my leadership, my colleagues and I directed rate decreases. UI and Connecticut Water received modest increases. So I hope that provides more clarity around the components of the rates that PURA has had oversight over for the past couple of years.
So, if I may, Mr. Chair, through you, so you did reference the public benefit and some aspects you may have disagreed with, but is it not true that part of the increase in the public benefit that so many consumers had to see this past summer and continues to see today was the extension of the moratorium? Is that correct?
It was a portion of the system benefits charge that was increased, so it was So of the increase that went onto the bills last year, over 77% of it was attributable to the Millstone Power Purchase Agreement. The remainder of that was attributable across the board to a number of different low-income programs that are required by statute. Some component of that was attributable to the moratorium, but I do want to clarify that that was not debt forgiveness, and the concept of uncollectibles has existed since the beginning of time of regulated utilities. So it is not accurate to say that the costs attributed with uncollectibles is a new component. It was a small component of that increase last year.
Right, but it was a component in the public benefit being increased, and you did extend it, correct?
The agency extended the moratorium.
And what was your position on that?
We received a motion, I apologize, it was a motion or a correspondence from the co-chairs of the Committee of Cognizance asking for an extension after a number of days, and considering the comments that were received, the agency issued a ruling extending that moratorium, and I supported that ruling.
You supported it, and it cost the ratepayers about $117 million in the public benefit this year, correct?
That is not a number that I would have to get back to you on that number, but
Okay,
I will
well, that's
say,
the number that I have.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to understand is there are significant aspects of PURA and under your leadership that has increased rates. And so I'm asking you today, where we sit here today, do you take any level of responsibility for where the consumers sit here today, paying these outrageous electric bills?
As the head of an agency that is tasked with providing rigorous scrutiny to the applications that come before it, I will say that my staff, my colleagues, and I have done our very best to provide fair and rigorous scrutiny to all the applications that come before us. Certainly, as I think everyone can relate to, and when you look backwards on your work, there are always opportunities for improvement, but we made the best decision that we could at the time based on the comments and the evidence and the record before us.
And you know, in terms of the public benefit, you know, there's a lot of emails that were disclosed where I understand PURA doesn't necessarily have a policy role, but admittedly, Chairwoman, there's extensive emails where there was involvement, or at least significant input into energy policy in the state with our lawmakers. And so I'd love to hear, you know, whether or not you believe it's fair that this public benefit continues to get baked into the cost of the hardworking people of this state, and do you believe that it's unacceptable, as do I and so many of my colleagues?
I believe that it is the decision of this body how and whether you want to continue those programs, and if you continue those programs, what the funding source is. Similar to questions that I've answered already today, I believe that that is a question for the legislature, and as a creature of statute, we would work to implement whatever your direction is.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, so through you, so I understand that and I respect that answer, but again, you know, I see all these emails where there's extensive involvement in providing your input towards energy policy in the state with lawmakers, and I'm asking you today on probably what is the biggest driver or the most upsetting aspect of the electric bills for consumers throughout the state that are struggling to make ends meet. I'm asking you of what your opinion, because I think it's important. Obviously, you're involved with crafting energy policy. We see email after email after email where you're stating your opinion, you're giving your input, you're influencing policy. And so I'm a little upset, I got to be honest, in asking you what's your opinion on the public benefit, and on that issue, you want to leave it to us to figure out, but on other issues, you're more than happy to give your input. I mean, do you understand what I'm asking? I
do. Thank you so much for the question. I certainly respect your position and your frustration. I, like everyone else, has had to pay those bills over the past 8 months or so at this point, so I can certainly respect that. I will say I've done a deep dive into the public benefits since then and looked at the 56 to 57. I apologize, I can't remember the exact number off the top of of my head, of line items that are in that bill. When I look at those, and I've tried to trace them back to specific legislation, they sometimes refer to contracts that have been executed that are in place for somewhere between 10 and 30 years. So my opinion about whether the public benefits should be tied to the electric bill or the general fund is that we should all sit down and look at every single line item in that public benefits and understand whether it is more cost effective to move it to the general fund, because I think when you start to look at those line items and understand how directly some of them are tied to the electricity markets and that they last for between 10 and 30 years, starting to dig into the details about the volatility associated with them makes answering the question and having an opinion on the 56 or 57 line items challenging. So I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm trying to say I don't think that there is an easy answer here, and it might be a line-by-line answer.
Okay. If I may, Mr. Chair, in that same vein then, so one of the aspects of the public benefit, I believe, was the EV charging stations being put on the backs of the ratepayers. Is that correct?
That's correct. It amounts to about 0.003 cents per month.
Okay. And so you did approve, in your leadership in PURA, the EV charging station program being put on the backs of the ratepayers?
I will say that, as I mentioned, we are a creature of statute. The light-duty electric vehicle charging program that underlies what you're mentioning is a function of statutes that we have been directed to stand up, just like the Energy Storage Solutions Program. They all tie back to legislation. Many of the legislation that are passed that underlie some of these programs are fairly specific in how those costs should be recovered, including most of them saying things like it should be recovered through the non-bypassable federally mandated congestion charge, which is a mouthful. It's also a component of the public benefits charge. So yes, we designed that program at the direction of the administration and different legislative dockets, and then had to provide cost recovery for it.
And again, I'm sure you're not going to be able to provide an opinion on this, but I mean, do you believe in fairness baking that type of program onto the ratepayers is a fair thing to do to the consumers of this state?
Every program that PURA has designed during my tenure has undergone rigorous cost-benefit testing, which means that when we design the program, the cost-benefit tests need to demonstrate that there are more benefits to ratepayers as a whole than costs, that program included. I am certainly willing to commit to and continuing to ensure that programs that PURA is tasked with designing continue to meet those rigorous thresholds.
In terms of, I'm going to address the issue that I think has driven us. I mean, Senator Duff had mentioned earlier about reports. I am sure you've seen these reports and why we sit here today. Frankly, in my 10 years in the legislature, there's fewer days where I've been angrier or more upset about the process and how we ultimately got here today and how things were negotiated in dark rooms. And what makes it even worse is the subject matter in which we're dealing with today, and that is the ratepayers. I was on the phone with a 90-year-old woman in Brookfield who could barely afford to pay her electric bill. And we're sitting here today to wait the decision of whether or not to reappoint the person that oversees PURA and the utilities regulator in the state of Connecticut. I would argue probably some of the biggest authority, if not the biggest authority, over rates in the state of Connecticut. And what was done in the dark of night, in the 11th hour, to get certain people to vote yes today, presumably, is one of the worst things I've seen in politics in this building. And so I don't know what your involvement may have been in that with the governor's office and ultimately what this governor constructed to get yes votes here today. for your reappointment. And I guess I just have to go out there and ask you, what was your involvement with the governor's office in the negotiations that were reported today?
I did not have any involvement in what has been reported over the past 24 hours. In fact, I've tried to stay away from the media and prepare today, as I was hoping to come here to discuss my qualifications and records, my qualifications and record of service over the past couple of years, and I did not have any involvement in what has been reported.
So you haven't had any communications, have you had communications with the governor's office in general over the past few days or week?
Certainly, anyone on the committee who accepted a meeting with me, I attended with the governor's office, and certainly they have helped me prepare, as I think they help every candidate prepare. So those have been my communications.
Were you asked your opinion on certain people being appointed to PURA, or PURA becoming a quasi-public?
I do not have an opinion on the structure of PURA or who should be appointed to it.
Chairwoman, with all due respect, I'm not asking you what your opinion is on that. What I'm asking you is, have you had any communication with the governor's office about becoming a quasi-public as it relates to this deal that was struck today with legislators?
I have to say that I just don't have an opinion, and I think the governor's office has made it clear that what I'm here to do is to speak about my qualifications and my record, and so they have asked me to stay focused on that and preparing for it. So I don't think they would put me in that position, because they've been very clear that they want me to focus on preparing for today.
And Chairwoman, Mr. Chair, if I may, respectfully, so I'm not asking you your opinion. I know that you said you have no opinion on PURA becoming quasi-public, which I find alarming, that you would have zero opinion on the entity that you've chaired for 6 years now, taking an astronomical step, becoming essentially a Port Authority PURA board. But with that said, I'm not asking again your opinion. I'm asking you very simply, yes or no, have you had communications with the governor's office about PURA becoming a quasi-public, yes or no?
Yes, I was aware from reading at least the media that was a component of the conversation.
And what did you discuss with the governor?
I respectfully told him that my understanding is that PURA has functioned as an executive branch agency, and that I will work I am committed to providing public service moving forward under whatever structure this legislature and the governor chooses.
And in all honesty, in your testimony here today, Mrs. Chairwoman, you did understand that part of that discussion involved getting certain people appointments on PURA, right? You understood all that, correct?
Of course, I've read the news just as everyone has, but I have tried to remain focused on my demonstrating to the committee my qualifications and record, and that has been my focus in preparing for today.
So you are saying that you did have an involvement in this backroom deal that was struck for your nomination today?
No, sir, I did not have an involvement. I was not asked to bless the deal. I didn't have involvement in formulating that deal.
Okay. But you were asked for your input, I guess, on this deal then?
Over the past week, it has certainly been asked of me whether PURA could function as a quasi, but I did not provide anything other than what I have said in the past few minutes, and I did not sign off on the deal. It was not put to me that way.
Right. With all due, if I may, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, Chairwoman, I'm not asking you if you had to give a blessing on the deal, but I was asking you if you had an input in the deal, and it seems like, from what you're now telling us, is that you did have, sounds like, extensive communications with the governor's office on certain people being appointed, and now PURA taking the astronomical step of becoming a quasi-public.
Respectfully, sir, I don't agree with the characterization that I had extensive involvement in that. I think being asked my opinion and telling them once what I just shared with you, I would not characterize that way.
And that's fair, Madam Chairwoman. I know you to be a highly intelligent woman. You know what goes on in this building. And so I would assume, as you did testify, that when the governor's office started asking you questions about this, you knew exactly what was going on.
As I've already stated, I did read the news, yes.
Okay. I'll wrap up my questioning. I do want to thank you, Chairwoman, for coming here today. I just find it horrendous that we sit here today to have a real, I thought, a substantive conversation about reducing electric rates in the state of Connecticut and helping people that literally are moving out of this state because they can't afford to pay electric bills here. And under your tenure over the 6 years that you've been here, whether you want to take responsibility for it or not, and you have to some respect here today, we have some of the highest electric rates in the country. We've had public benefit charges, which PURA has approved, or aspects of it, that have skyrocketed, that people can't afford to pay. We have a real opportunity here to have a substantive conversation for once in this building about actually doing something to help reduce electric rates for the people of this state. And it frustrates me beyond words that we're sitting here today with your nomination and we're having discussions about what essentially, and I know you're saying that you had limited involvement in this, but let's be frank, what backroom deals were struck to get certain people onto PURA because they're friendly with other individuals or want a retirement when we have people that can't afford to pay their electric bills. It's a disgrace. Thank you, Mr. Chair.